Willow Creek was the kind of place where time moved a little slower. Nestled in the heart of Montana, it was surrounded by rolling hills, dense forests, and a crystal-clear river that reflected the wide, open sky. The town had a population of just over 3,000, a mix of farmers, craftsmen, and a few retirees who sought the serenity that only a place like Willow Creek could offer. Helen Carter, a 63-year-old widow, lived on the outskirts of town in a modest farmhouse surrounded by acres of corn and wheat. Her silver hair was always tied back in a neat bun, and her hands bore the calluses of a lifetime of hard work. Despite the years that had passed since her husband's death, Helen had kept the farm running with the help of her nephew, Tommy, and a few trusted farmhands. The people of Willow Creek knew Helen as more than just a farmer. She was a pillar of the community, someone they turned to for advice, wisdom, or even just a kind word. On Saturday mornings, she could always be found at the town square, running a stand at the farmer's market. This Saturday started like any other. The morning sun bathed the cobblestone streets in golden light as Helen carefully arranged baskets of fresh produce. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," called out Mary Langston, a local baker. "Those tomatoes look as perfect as ever." "Thank you, Mary," Helen replied with a warm smile. "Your bread smells heavenly this morning. I'll take a loaf before the day's done." As the market filled with cheerful chatter, no one noticed the faint rumble in the distance. At least, not at first. But soon, the sound grew louder, a deep, mechanical growl that reverberated through the streets. Helen looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing as a line of motorcycles roared into the town square. There were a dozen of them, all gleaming chrome and black leather. The riders wore matching jackets with a logo stitched across the back, a silver storm cloud with jagged lightning bolts beneath the words Storm Riders. The market grew quiet. Vendors froze in place, and parents instinctively pulled their children closer. The bikers parked their motorcycles in a line, engines rumbling even after they dismounted. At their head stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a thick, grizzled beard. His sunglasses reflected the nervous faces of the townsfolk as he removed his helmet. "Morning, folks," the man said, his voice carrying over the silence. "Name's Vince Dawson. My friends and I just rolled into town, and we're looking to get to know the locals." There was an edge to his words, a thinly veiled menace that sent shivers through the crowd. The other bikers began wandering through the market, their presence more than enough to unsettle everyone. Helen kept her composure, her hands steady as she continued arranging tomatoes. She could feel the tension in the air, but she refused to show fear. "Can I help you, Mr. Dawson?" Sheriff Dale Roberts stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. Roberts was a tall man in his early 50s, with a weathered face and a calm demeanor that rarely wavered. Dawson turned to the sheriff, his smile more a sneer than anything else. "Just passing through. Thought we'd check out your charming little town." "Appreciate the interest," Roberts replied evenly. "But we don't take kindly to folks making people uncomfortable. Keep things civil, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like." Dawson chuckled. "Oh, we're all about civility, Sheriff. In fact, we're here to offer a little partnership." Helen's sharp hearing caught the shift in his tone. Dawson wasn't here by accident. He had a purpose, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be good for Willow Creek. By mid-morning, the bikers had spread out across the market, lingering at various stands and muttering to each other. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, approached Helen's stand. He picked up a tomato, turning it in his hand before dropping it back into the basket with a smirk. "Nice setup you've got here," he said. "Bet you do good business." Helen met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I do well enough. Bet you'd hate to see anything happen to it," the man continued, leaning in slightly. "You know, accidents happen all the time in places like this. Fires, break-ins, that sort of thing." "I'm not interested in what you're selling," Helen replied calmly, her voice firm but even. The man's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" Helen didn't flinch. "I've lived through worse than you." Before the man could respond, Sheriff Roberts appeared at Helen's side. "Move along," he said to the biker, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man hesitated, then backed off with a shrug. "Suit yourself, lady." Just don't say we didn't warn you. As the day wore on, the tension in Willow Creek only grew. The storm riders didn't leave after the market closed. Instead, they settled in at the local diner, their loud voices and overbearing presence driving away most of the regular patrons. Meanwhile, Helen drove back to her farmhouse, her mind racing. She had seen men like this before, bullies who thrived on fear. But there was something different about the storm riders, something more calculated. That evening, Helen picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Ryan," she said when her son answered. "We need to talk." Ryan Carter had been working a private security job in Denver when he received his mother's call. It had been 5 years since he'd left the Marine Corps, but his military training was still second nature. As his mother explained the situation, Ryan's instincts kicked in. "I'll be there tomorrow," he promised. By the time Ryan arrived in Willow Creek, the situation had escalated. Several business owners had reported vandalism, and Sheriff Roberts was stretched thin trying to maintain order. The bikers' demands were growing bolder, with Vince Dawson now openly claiming that Willow Creek needed protection. Ryan wasted no time. He met with Helen and Sheriff Roberts that evening, laying out a plan to gather intelligence on the gang. "These guys aren't just random thugs," Ryan said. "They're organized. If we're going to stop them, we need to know what they're after." Helen nodded, her resolve unshaken. "This is our town, Ryan. We're not going to let them take it from us." Ryan Carter arrived in Willow Creek at dawn, the faint light glinting off the dew-covered fields as he drove through the quiet streets. His black SUV, loaded with equipment from his private security work, stood out against the simple pickup trucks and sedans lining the town's roads. As he parked outside Helen's farmhouse, memories of his childhood rushed back. The creak of the porch steps, the familiar scent of freshly tilled soil, and the unwavering strength of his mother, who was already waiting for him on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee. "Thanks for coming, Ryan," Helen said as he stepped out of the car. He hugged her tightly. "Always, Mom. You said there was trouble. Let's get to work." Inside, Helen filled Ryan in on everything that had happened since the storm riders arrived. She spoke calmly, but her voice carried the weight of urgency. Ryan listened intently, his mind already assembling a mental map of the situation. "They're not just here to shake people down," Helen concluded. "They're too organized for that. It feels bigger, like they've planned this for a while." Ryan nodded. "You're probably right. Small towns like this are perfect for operations they don't want anyone noticing. Remote, quiet, and easy to intimidate. But they didn't count on you, or this town." He placed his laptop on the kitchen table and began typing. "First, we figure out who they really are. I have some contacts who can help." Over the next few hours, Ryan reached out to his network of former colleagues and law enforcement contacts. By mid-morning, he had a dossier on the storm riders. The information confirmed Helen's instincts. This wasn't just a gang of rowdy bikers. The storm riders were a cover for a larger organization known as Iron Hand Logistics, a criminal enterprise involved in smuggling and illegal arms trafficking. Their leader, Vince Dawson, was a former Army contractor with a history of violence and a knack for recruiting ex-military personnel. Iron Hand had been expanding its operations across the Midwest, using small towns like Willow Creek to establish distribution hubs for stolen military-grade weapons. "This isn't just a gang," Ryan said, scrolling through the files. "It's a front for something much bigger. Dawson and his crew are professionals. They're using the storm riders' reputation to keep the locals scared while they set up shop." Helen's jaw tightened. "And what do they want from Willow Creek?" Ryan pointed to a map of the area. "This town is at the intersection of several rural highways and has access to an old freight line. It's perfect for moving cargo without attracting attention. My guess is they're planning to use the rail depot to store and transport weapons." Helen leaned over the table, her sharp eyes scanning the map. "Then they'll try to control the town completely, force everyone into submission so there's no resistance." Ryan nodded grimly. "That's the pattern. They did the same thing in 2 other towns before this, Mason Ridge and Bridge Hollow. Both places fell apart after the storm riders moved in. Businesses closed, people moved away, and the gang took over everything." Helen straightened, her voice steady. "Not here. Not Willow Creek." Later that day, Ryan met with Sheriff Dale Roberts at the station. The sheriff's office was small but well kept, a testament to Robert's dedication to his role. The sheriff looked up from his desk as Ryan walked in. "Carter," Roberts greeted him with a firm handshake. "Your mother said you'd be coming. I take it you've got some experience with this sort of thing?" "You could say that," Ryan replied. "I've been looking into the Storm Riders. They're not just running a protection racket, they're planning something much bigger." Roberts sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I figured as much. Their moves are too calculated for common thugs. But I've only got a small department, and most of my deputies aren't trained for this kind of thing. We don't need to outgun them," Ryan said. "We need to outsmart them. I'll help you set up a plan to keep the town safe while we gather evidence." Roberts nodded. "I'm in. What do you need from me?" "Eyes and ears on their movements. Document everything. What they do, where they go, who they talk to. We'll need solid evidence to bring in state or federal authorities." Roberts hesitated. "And if they push back?" "They will," Ryan replied. "But we'll be ready." That evening, Ryan and Helen drove into town to observe the Storm Riders. The bikers had taken over the diner, their loud voices and rough demeanor driving away most of the regular patrons. Vince Dawson sat at a corner booth, his heavy frame commanding attention even in silence. Ryan watched him carefully from a table near the back, his marine instincts picking up on subtle details. The tactical placement of the bikers, the way they watched the room, the concealed weapons under their jackets. "These guys aren't amateurs," Ryan murmured to Helen. "They're trained. Look at how they position themselves, always covering the exits." Helen sipped her coffee, her gaze steady. "What do we do?" "For now, we observe. We need to figure out their schedule, their patterns. They're up to something, and we need to know what before we act." As they left the diner, one of the bikers followed them out. He was young, barely in his 20s, with a cocky grin that faded when Ryan turned to face him. "Something on your mind?" Ryan asked, his voice calm but firm. The biker smirked, pulling out a cigarette. "Just saying hi. You new in town?" "Been here longer than you," Ryan replied. The biker's grin faltered, but he shrugged and walked away. Ryan watched him go, his mind already working through contingencies. The next morning, Sheriff Roberts called an emergency meeting at the town hall. About 30 people showed up, most of them business owners or community leaders. The room buzzed with nervous energy as Roberts stood at the front, flanked by Ryan and Helen. "We're here because our town is under threat," Roberts began. "The Storm Riders aren't just a bunch of rowdy bikers. They're part of a larger operation, and they're trying to take over Willow Creek." The crowd murmured in alarm. "What can we do?" asked Martha Jenkins, the owner of the general store. "They're armed. They're dangerous." Ryan stepped forward. "We don't fight them head-on. We document everything. Their threats, their movements, anything illegal. The more evidence we have, the better our chances of shutting them down." "And what if they escalate?" Tom Miller, a local farmer, asked. "Then we're ready," Ryan said. "We set up a network. Cameras, safe zones, communication lines. We don't need to confront them directly. We just need to outlast them." Helen added, "This town has faced droughts, floods, and wildfires. We've always come through by standing together. This is no different. We protect each other, and we don't give in to fear." As the meeting ended, the mood shifted. The fear was still there, but so was determination. The people of Willow Creek weren't fighters by nature, but they were resilient. That night, Ryan worked late, setting up surveillance equipment around key locations in town. Helen watched from the porch, her heart swelling with pride as she saw her son moving with purpose. "Do you think we can stop them?" she asked when he came inside. Ryan nodded. "If we play this smart, we can. But we'll need everyone on board. This isn't just about protecting the town. It's about showing them they can't win." As Ryan sat down at the table to review his notes, Helen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'm glad you're here." Ryan looked up at her, his expression resolute. "Me too, Mom. We'll get through this. Together." The people of Willow Creek were no strangers to hard times. Over the decades, the town had weathered blizzards, wildfires, and economic downturns that could have crushed less resilient communities. But the threat posed by the Storm Riders was different. It wasn't nature or bad luck. It was a calculated assault on the town's way of life. By the time Ryan Carter finished his third day in Willow Creek, the townspeople were already beginning to organize. With Helen Carter's steady leadership and Ryan's military expertise, the town slowly transformed from a vulnerable target into a growing bastion of resistance. It started small, with whispered conversations over coffee at the diner or after Sunday service at the local church. Helen spoke to neighbors she trusted, Martha Jenkins, who owned the general store, Tom Miller, a farmer with a history of standing up for what was right, and Lila Martin, a young woman known for her tech-savvy skills. "I know it's asking a lot," Helen said as they gathered in her kitchen one evening, "but if we don't stand together now, they'll tear this town apart." Tom nodded, his weathered face grim. "I've seen what fear does to people. If we let them win, we'll lose more than our businesses. We'll lose our community." Lila, her laptop open on the table, added, "I've been digging into their communications. They're using burner phones, but I've managed to track some patterns. They're definitely coordinating with someone outside the town." Ryan leaned forward. "If we can intercept those communications, we'll have leverage. Evidence to expose them for what they are." The resistance grew slowly, but steadily. Ryan started training small groups in basic self-defense and tactical thinking. They used the barn on Helen's property as a makeshift training ground, with hay bales and old wooden crates serving as improvised obstacles. "You don't need to be a soldier to protect yourself," Ryan explained to the group one afternoon. "You just need to be aware and prepared. The more we know about their movements, the better chance we have of staying ahead of them." Martha Jenkins, though in her 50s and a stranger to combat, practiced diligently. "If I'm going to stand up to those thugs, I need to know how to handle myself," she said, her determination shining through. Meanwhile, Lila set up a secure communication network using old radios and walkie-talkies. "They're relying on modern tech," she told Ryan. "But sometimes, the old-school stuff is harder to track." The Storm Riders, oblivious to the growing resistance, continued their efforts to intimidate the town. They roamed the streets in groups, their presence a constant reminder of the threat hanging over Willow Creek. One evening, Vince Dawson visited the general store, flanked by two of his men. Martha was behind the counter, her heart pounding as they entered. "Evening, ma'am," Dawson said, his voice oily and insincere. "Just here to pick up a few things." Martha forced a smile, her hands steady as she rang up their purchases. But as Dawson left, he leaned in close. "Hope you're enjoying the peace and quiet," he said softly. "Be a shame if something disrupted it." After they left, Martha called Helen, her voice shaking. "He knows I've been talking to people. What if they come after me next?" "They won't," Helen assured her. "You're not alone in this, Martha. None of us are." As the days passed, the Storm Riders began to notice subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Their attempts to intimidate shop owners were met with polite, but firm, resistance. Residents kept their distance but stayed watchful, noting every move the bikers made. Ryan and Lila monitored the gang's communications, piecing together their plans. They discovered that Dawson was growing impatient. "They're planning something big," Ryan said during a late-night meeting at the barn. "I think they're getting ready to move weapons through the rail depot. If we can find proof of that, we'll have enough to shut them down." Sheriff Roberts, who had joined the meeting, nodded. "But we need to be careful. If they suspect we're onto them, they'll escalate." Helen, seated at the head of the table, spoke with quiet authority. "Then we make sure they don't suspect a thing. Let's keep gathering information and make our move when the time is right." One night, Ryan and Lila set up a covert surveillance operation near the rail depot. They parked an old truck at the edge of the property, its bed covered with tarps to conceal their equipment. Through binoculars, Ryan watched as the bikers unloaded crates from a semi-truck, their movements swift and practiced. "Those aren't ordinary supplies," Ryan said. "Look at the size of those crates. They're moving something serious." Lila typed furiously on her laptop, trying to intercept any communications from the depot. "Got it," she whispered. "A message about a shipment coming through tomorrow night. This might be our chance." The next day, Helen called a meeting at the town hall. The crowd was larger than before, with more residents ready to take a stand. "We've confirmed that they're using the rail depot to move illegal cargo," Helen told the room. "If we can document it and get the evidence to the right authorities, we can stop them. Ryan addressed the crowd. But we need to stay united. They'll try to divide us, to make us afraid. Don't give them that power. Together, we're stronger than they are. The room buzzed with a mix of fear and determination. People shared ideas, volunteered their skills, and pledged to help however they could. We've faced hard times before, Tom Miller said, his voice steady. This is no different. We'll get through this, just like we always have. The tension in Willow Creek reached its breaking point on a hot Friday evening. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in deep reds and purples, but the beauty of the twilight did little to calm the unease that gripped the town. The storm riders were no longer trying to hide their intentions. They prowled the streets in packs, loud and brazen, their presence a constant reminder of the threat hanging over the town. At Helen Carter's farmhouse, the kitchen table had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Maps of the town were spread across its surface, marked with pins and notes. Ryan Carter, Helen's son, stood at the head of the table, briefing a small group of trusted townspeople. Sheriff Dale Roberts leaned against the wall, his hat pulled low, listening intently. They're gearing up for something big, Ryan said, tapping a point on the map near the rail depot. Their movements suggest they're planning a major shipment, possibly as soon as tomorrow night. Martha Jenkins, the general store owner, frowned. What kind of shipment? Military-grade weapons, Ryan replied. If they're bringing in what I think they are, this goes beyond just controlling the town. They're setting up Willow Creek as a distribution hub. The room fell silent. The enormity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone present. So what do we do? Asked Tom Miller, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Ryan straightened. We prepare. This is our turning point. We can't let them consolidate their hold. If we stand together now, we can push back before it's too late. The next morning, Helen stood at the edge of her porch, watching the sun rise over the fields. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The townspeople had agreed to meet at the church later that day to finalize their plans. You sure about this, Mom? Ryan asked as he joined her. She turned to him, her expression resolute. This is our home, Ryan. If we don't fight for it, who will? Ryan nodded. He couldn't argue with that. By noon, the church pews were filled with residents ready to take a stand. Helen stood at the pulpit, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. We've faced challenges before, she began. Floods, droughts, hard winters. Every time, we came through because we stood together. This is no different. The storm riders think they can take our town, but they don't understand who we are. Applause rippled through the room. Ryan stepped forward next. We're not asking you to fight them head-on, he said. Our strength lies in our numbers and our knowledge of this town. We know every road, every alley, every hiding place. That's our advantage. Lila Martin, the town's tech-savvy young woman, stood up from the back. I've been monitoring their communications, she said. They're definitely coordinating with someone outside the town. If we can intercept their next shipment and document it, we'll have enough evidence to shut them down. Sheriff Roberts added, but we have to be smart. They're armed, and they won't hesitate to use force if they feel cornered. The plan was simple, yet effective. Ryan and a small group would monitor the rail depot from a concealed position, ready to record any illegal activity. Lila would hack into their communications to disrupt their plans and provide real-time updates. The rest of the townspeople would create diversions, slowing the gang's movements and keeping them off balance. As the sun set, the town sprang into action. Ryan, Sheriff Roberts, and Tom Miller set up their surveillance post near the depot, using an abandoned barn as cover. Lila stayed in the church basement, her laptop glowing in the dim light as she monitored the gang's frequencies. Helen, meanwhile, coordinated the townspeople from her farmhouse. Groups of residents took up positions near key points, ready to create distractions if needed. They used what they had: old tractors, hay bales, and even a few firecrackers to draw attention away from the depot. The storm riders, sensing resistance, ramped up their intimidation tactics. They patrolled the streets in greater numbers, shining flashlights into windows and revving their engines loudly. But the town stayed resolute, their fear tempered by a growing sense of unity. At the rail depot, Ryan watched through binoculars as the gang prepared for the shipment. A semi-truck pulled up, its trailer heavily guarded by armed men. "They're moving something big," Ryan whispered to Roberts. "Do we have enough evidence?" the sheriff asked. "Almost," Ryan replied. "We need to catch them unloading." The truck's doors swung open, revealing large crates stamped with military markings. The bikers worked quickly, unloading the cargo under the cover of darkness. Ryan activated his camera, filming every detail. Beside him, Roberts radioed Lila. "They're unloading now. Can you intercept their comms?" "Already on it," Lila replied. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she hacked into the gang's communication network. "Got it. They're coordinating with someone named Hawk. Sounds like he's their supplier." Back in town, the diversions began. A group of teenagers lit a stack of hay bales on fire near the market square, drawing several bikers away from the depot. At the same time, Martha Jenkins and a few others used an old tractor to block one of the main roads. The Storm Riders scrambled to respond, their cohesion beginning to falter. "This is working," Helen said over the radio. "Keep it up." As the bikers' focus shifted, Ryan saw his chance. He crept closer to the depot, capturing clearer footage of the crates and overhearing the gang's conversations. "They're saying the shipment's heading to a bigger operation in Chicago," Ryan whispered. "This is the link we need." But just as he began to retreat, one of the bikers spotted movement in the shadows. "Hey, over there." Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing through the night. Ryan and Roberts ducked for cover, returning fire only to suppress the bikers' advance. "We're made," Ryan shouted into his radio. "Fall back." The townspeople, hearing the commotion, sprang into action. They unleashed a coordinated wave of distractions, more fires, loud noises, and even a sudden power outage that plunged part of the depot into darkness. Under cover of the chaos, Ryan and Roberts managed to escape, their evidence secured. By dawn, the Storm Riders were in disarray. Several of their members had been injured or captured, and their shipment was now under scrutiny. The footage Ryan had captured, combined with Lila's intercepted communications, painted a clear picture of the gang's illegal activities. At the farmhouse, Ryan, Helen, and Sheriff Roberts reviewed their findings. "This is enough to bring in federal authorities," Roberts said. "But they won't go down without a fight," Ryan warned. "We've hurt them, but they're not finished yet." Helen placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." The Storm Riders were reeling, but their leader, Vince Dawson, was not the kind of man to retreat quietly. By the morning after the raid on the rail depot, Dawson's fury was palpable. He stood in the middle of the gang's makeshift headquarters, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, barking orders to his men. "They think they can stand up to us?" Dawson snarled, slamming a fist on the table. "We're going to show them what happens when you cross the Storm Riders." The gang's lieutenants nodded grimly. Plans were made quickly and without mercy. That evening, Willow Creek would feel the full weight of Dawson's vengeance. The day began uneventfully in Willow Creek. The townspeople were tense but determined, still buoyed by the small victory at the rail depot. At Helen Carter's farmhouse, Ryan and Sheriff Dale Roberts reviewed their footage and notes, preparing to hand over their evidence to federal authorities. "This should be enough to bring them down," Roberts said, scrolling through images of the stolen weapons. Ryan nodded, but kept his gaze on the horizon. "It's not over yet. Dawson's not the type to let this go. He's going to strike back, and when he does, it'll be big." Helen entered the room with a tray of coffee. "The town's ready," she said. "We've been through worse than this. We'll stand together." Ryan gave her a small smile. "That's what worries me. When people like Dawson lose control, they lash out. He won't just target property. He'll go after people." That afternoon, the first signs of trouble began. Martha Jenkins' general store, a cornerstone of the community, was ransacked. Windows were shattered, shelves overturned, and inventory destroyed. By the time Martha arrived, the bikers were gone, leaving only the wreckage and a spray-painted warning on the wall. "Leave or else." Martha called Helen in tears. "They're trying to break us, Helen. They want us to give up." "They won't succeed," Helen replied firmly. "We'll rebuild. We'll fight back." As night fell, the Storm Riders escalated their attacks. Fires were set at 2 farms on the outskirts of town, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. The fire department scrambled to contain the blazes, but the damage was done. Barns, equipment, and livelihoods were reduced to ashes. Tom Miller, whose farm had been targeted, stood beside his ruined barn, his face set with grim determination. "They think they can scare us into submission," he told Helen, who had arrived to help. "But all they've done is make me angrier." Meanwhile, Ryan and Sheriff Roberts patrolled the town, responding to reports of vandalism and harassment. At the diner, a group of bikers overturned tables and threw chairs through the windows before speeding off into the night. "This isn't just intimidation," Roberts said as they surveyed the damage. "They're trying to destroy the town piece by piece." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Then we need to hit back harder." By midnight, the town was in chaos. The Storm Riders had split into smaller groups, targeting homes and businesses in a coordinated assault. But they hadn't counted on the town's growing resistance. At the hardware store, a group of residents led by Lila Martin and Tom Miller had set up a defensive perimeter. When a group of bikers tried to break in, they were met with floodlights, blaring alarms, and a wall of determined townspeople armed with everything from baseball bats to hunting rifles. "Not here," Tom growled as he stood his ground. "You want a fight? You'll get one." The bikers, caught off guard by the resistance, retreated with curses and threats. Across town, Ryan and Roberts intercepted another group of bikers attempting to set fire to the town hall. The two men moved with precision, using their training to neutralize the gang's efforts without unnecessary violence. "Back off," Ryan shouted as he disarmed one of the bikers, tossing the man's lighter into the dirt. The biker sneered but backed away, regrouping with his comrades. "Stay vigilant," Roberts told Ryan as they watched the gang disappear into the night. "They're testing us, looking for a weak spot." Ryan nodded. "Let them. We'll be ready." At the farmhouse, Helen had gathered several townspeople who had been displaced by the night's events. Her home became a temporary refuge, with the kitchen and living room filled with neighbors offering comfort and support. "This is what they don't understand," Helen said quietly to Martha. "They can destroy our buildings, but they can't destroy our community. That's what will beat them in the end." By the early hours of the morning, the attacks began to subside. The Storm Riders had inflicted significant damage, but their efforts to break the town's spirit had failed. Instead, the attacks only strengthened the residents' resolve. At the farmhouse, Ryan and Roberts regrouped with Helen and the others. "They're desperate," Ryan said. "They're trying to scare us into submission, but they're running out of moves." Roberts nodded. "We'll need to move fast. The federal response team won't get here for another day or two. Until then, it's up to us to hold the line." Helen stood, her voice steady. "Then that's what we'll do. This town isn't just a collection of buildings. It's the people, the history, the connections we share. They'll never understand that." As dawn broke over Willow Creek, the town was battered but unbroken. Residents emerged from their homes, surveying the damage and helping one another rebuild. The Storm Riders had struck the first blow, but the town had withstood it. And as the sun rose, casting its golden light over the fields and streets, a new determination settled over Willow Creek. The battle was far from over, but the people of Willow Creek had shown that they wouldn't go down without a fight. And with Ryan, Helen, and Sheriff Roberts leading the charge, they were ready for whatever came next. The first light of dawn revealed the scars left by the Storm Riders' rampage. Smoke still curled from the ruins of barns, shattered glass glittered in the streets, and the acrid smell of burned wood lingered in the air. But Willow Creek's residents weren't broken. If anything, the destruction only hardened their resolve. Helen Carter stood on her porch, surveying the horizon. Despite the long night of chaos, her silver hair was neatly tied back, and her eyes shone with quiet determination. Inside, Ryan was loading gear into his bag, his movements methodical. Sheriff Dale Roberts leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping coffee as he reviewed the plans they had laid out during the night. "They'll be back," Ryan said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "They always are," Roberts replied. "But this time, we'll be ready." By midday, Willow Creek had transformed into a fortress of quiet resistance. The townspeople, under Ryan's guidance, fortified key locations, the town hall, the rail depot, the general store, and the church. They set up barricades using hay bales, broken-down tractors, and anything else they could find. At Helen's farmhouse, Martha Jenkins and a group of women worked tirelessly to prepare food and supplies for the volunteers. "We're not just standing around," Martha said, handing out sandwiches. "If the men can fight, so can we." Tom Miller and a few other farmers stationed themselves along the town's outer roads, using their knowledge of the terrain to set up ambush points. "They'll come in loud, thinking we're too scared to stop them," Tom said, gripping his hunting rifle. "They've got another thing coming." Lila Martin, the town's tech genius, had turned the church basement into a command center. Her laptop displayed intercepted communications from the Storm Riders, and a large map of Willow Creek on the wall showed the bikers' likely approach routes. "They're regrouping," Lila reported. "Their comms are buzzing with chatter about reinforcements. They're calling in backup from a neighboring town." "How many?" Ryan asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Another 10, maybe 15 riders," Lila replied. "It's going to be a fight." Ryan straightened. "Then we make it a fight they'll regret." The Storm Riders didn't wait long to make their next move. By late afternoon, the low rumble of motorcycles echoed through the hills. Dawson had gathered his forces, close to 30 riders now, and they descended on the town like a storm cloud. Vince Dawson rode at the head of the group, his eyes cold and furious. The failures of the previous night still burned in his mind, and he was determined to crush Willow Creek's resistance once and for all. "Spread out," he barked, gesturing to his lieutenants. "Hit every corner of this town. Leave nothing standing." The riders roared into Willow Creek, their engines drowning out the sounds of daily life. But what they found was not a town cowering in fear. It was a town standing ready. The first clash came at the general store. Martha Jenkins and a group of residents had fortified the building, using sandbags and overturned shelves as cover. As the bikers approached, they were met with a volley of stones, bottles, and firecrackers. "Fall back!" one of the bikers shouted as the makeshift barrage forced them to retreat. Inside, Martha adjusted her grip on a crowbar. "They won't get past us," she said, her voice steady. At the rail depot, Ryan and Tom Miller lay in wait. When the bikers arrived, they found the depot seemingly deserted. As they dismounted to investigate, Ryan and Tom sprang their trap. A series of booby traps, tripwires, smoke bombs, and makeshift barricades turned the depot into a chaotic battleground. "Let's move," Ryan shouted as he and Tom emerged from cover, using the confusion to drive the bikers back. The town square became the focal point of the battle. Sheriff Roberts and a group of deputies held their ground, using vehicles and benches as cover. The bikers, caught off guard by the town's organized resistance, began to falter. "They're not breaking," one of Dawson's lieutenants reported over the radio. "Then we make them break," Dawson snarled, revving his engine as he led a charge into the square. But Roberts was ready. As Dawson's group advanced, the sheriff fired a warning shot into the air. "This is your only chance to back down," he called out. Dawson sneered. "You don't have the guts to stop us." "We'll see about that," Roberts muttered, motioning for his team to hold their ground. The most intense fighting occurred near the church, where Lila had set up her command center. When a group of bikers tried to breach the building, they were met by a group of townspeople armed with everything from garden tools to old shotguns. Lila monitored the situation from the basement, relaying updates to Ryan and Roberts. "They're trying to flank us on the east side," she said over the radio. "Got it," Ryan replied. "Hold your position. We'll cut them off." As night fell, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Storm Riders, worn down by the town's relentless resistance, started to retreat. Dawson, realizing he was losing control, made a desperate push toward the town hall, where Helen and a group of residents were holding the line. Ryan intercepted him before he could reach the building. The two men squared off in the middle of the street, the chaos of the battle swirling around them. "You've done enough damage," Ryan said, his voice cold. "It ends here." Dawson laughed, drawing a knife. "You think you can stop me? I've crushed towns bigger than this." Ryan didn't respond. He moved swiftly, disarming Dawson with a series of precise strikes. The fight was brutal but brief. Within moments, Dawson was on the ground, his knife clattering to the pavement. "It's over," Ryan said, standing over him. For the first time, Dawson looked uncertain. He glanced around, seeing his forces in full retreat. "You don't know who you're messing with," he spat. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Ryan replied. "And I'm not scared of you." By midnight, the Storm Riders were gone, leaving behind their wounded and their leader. Dawson was taken into custody by Sheriff Roberts, who made the call to state authorities to secure the town. Helen, standing beside Ryan in the quiet aftermath, looked around at the battered but standing buildings of Willow Creek. "We did it," she said softly. Ryan nodded. "We held them off. But this isn't the end. There's still work to do." As the townspeople began to gather in the square, sharing hugs and stories of bravery, one thing was clear. Willow Creek had won this battle. The Storm Riders had underestimated the strength of a united community, and they had paid the price. The town had stood together, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. By dawn, the streets of Willow Creek were quiet again, but the scars of the battle remained. Burned-out husks of vehicles smoldered at the edges of the town square, shattered windows lined the main street, and the faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. Yet amidst the destruction, there was a sense of triumph. The Storm Riders had been driven out, and their leader, Vince Dawson, sat in a cell in the sheriff's office, stripped of his power. Inside the station, Sheriff Dale Roberts stared at Dawson through the bars. "You underestimated this town," Roberts said, his voice calm but firm. "You thought we'd roll over, but we're tougher than you'll ever understand." Dawson leaned back on the bench, his lips split from the fight with Ryan the night before. "You think this is over," he sneered. "I've got people, powerful people, who won't let this slide." "That's what we're counting on," Ryan said as he entered the station, holding a hard drive. "Because we've got something they won't want the world to see." The evidence Lila Martin had gathered during the battle was damning. Her surveillance network had intercepted the Storm Riders' communications, and her laptop now held audio files, video recordings, and decrypted messages that painted a clear picture of their operation. Ryan, Lila, and Helen sat around the kitchen table at the Carter farmhouse, reviewing the data. "This isn't just a local gang," Lila said, scrolling through a series of documents. "They've got connections to a larger network. Arms dealers, corrupt officials, even private security firms. They've been using small towns like Willow Creek to move illegal weapons across state lines." Helen frowned. "And Dawson is just a piece of the puzzle." Ryan nodded. "The real power is higher up. Dawson's just the middleman. If we want to stop this from happening again, we need to expose the whole network." That afternoon, the town held a meeting in the church, which had become their de facto command center. The pews were packed with residents, many still nursing bruises and cuts from the previous night's fight. Helen stood at the front, addressing the crowd. "We've won an important battle, but this isn't over. The people behind the Storm Riders think they can operate in the shadows, using towns like ours to hide their crimes. It's up to us to shine a light on what they're doing." The crowd murmured in agreement. Lila stepped forward next, holding up her laptop. "We have the evidence," she said. "Everything we need to expose them. But we'll need help to get this into the right hands." Sheriff Roberts nodded. "I've been in touch with state and federal authorities. They're sending people to secure the town and take Dawson into custody. But we need to act fast. If we wait too long, the people behind this will bury the evidence." Ryan spent the rest of the day preparing the evidence for transport. He and Lila copied the data onto multiple encrypted drives, ensuring there were backups in case anything went wrong. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Federal agents took control of Willow Creek's rail depot and secured the evidence that Ryan, Lila, and the townspeople had gathered. Vince Dawson and the remaining Storm Riders were transferred to a secure facility in Billings, where their interrogation began. Meanwhile, the FBI launched a nationwide investigation into the broader network of corruption and arms trafficking. For the first time in days, Willow Creek found itself eerily quiet. But the town was far from at ease. The scars of the recent conflict were visible everywhere, in the damaged storefronts, the burned-out barns, and the cautious expressions of its residents. Helen Carter, ever the heart of the community, stood on her porch early one morning, looking out over the fields. The sun was just rising, casting a warm glow over the land she had worked for decades. But even this moment of peace couldn't erase the lingering unease. Ryan joined her, coffee mug in hand. "Still thinking about what's next?" he asked. Helen sighed. "It's not just about what's next for me. It's about the town. They're strong, but this shook them. People are scared, and they have every right to be." Ryan nodded. "We've done everything we can here. The evidence is in the right hands, and Dawson's network is being dismantled. But you're right, there's a lot of rebuilding to do, and not just the buildings." Helen gave him a small smile. "Rebuilding is something this town knows how to do. We'll manage." That afternoon, the federal agents held a town meeting at the church to update the residents on their progress. Special Agent Sarah Delgado stood at the front, addressing the crowd with a professional but reassuring tone. "Thanks to your courage and cooperation, we've gathered enough evidence to take down one of the largest arms trafficking networks operating in the Midwest," Delgado said. "The information you provided has already led to multiple arrests, and more are expected in the coming weeks." The crowd murmured in relief, though the tension in the room was still palpable. "I won't lie to you," Delgado continued. "This fight isn't over. There are still individuals out there who won't be happy about what's happened here. But with your continued vigilance and support, we can ensure that justice is served." Helen stood to speak. "We've faced threats before, storms, fires, and economic hardships, but we've always come through because we stood together. This time is no different. We'll rebuild, and we'll come out stronger." Applause filled the church, and for the first time in days, the mood lightened. As the agents prepared to leave, Ryan pulled Delgado aside. "You said there might be backlash. What should we expect?" Delgado's expression turned serious. "The people Dawson worked for aren't going to let this go easily. They'll try to intimidate you, maybe even retaliate. But the more public this case becomes, the harder it will be for them to act. The best thing you can do is keep this town united and stay vigilant." Ryan nodded. "We'll be ready." The days that followed were a mix of rebuilding and reflection. The town rallied to repair the damage left by the storm riders. Residents donated time, money, and materials to restore the burned barns and shattered windows. Martha Jenkins reopened the general store with the help of volunteers, and Tom Miller's farm slowly returned to its former glory. Helen, as always, was at the center of it all. Whether it was organizing a fundraiser or simply offering a kind word, she made sure no one felt alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the town held a gathering in the square. It was part celebration, part memorial for what had been lost. Lanterns hung from trees, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and music. Helen stood at the microphone, addressing the crowd. "This town has been through more than most places ever will. But through it all, we've proven that Willow Creek isn't just a dot on a map, it's a family. And families take care of each other." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing into the night. As the celebration wound down, Ryan found himself standing alone near the edge of the square, looking out at the darkened streets. Helen joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" she asked gently. Ryan hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I've done what I came here to do. But another part of me," he trailed off, his gaze fixed on the town he had grown up in. "This town could use someone like you," Helen said. "Someone who knows how to protect it." Ryan smiled faintly. "I'll think about it." The next morning, Ryan received a call from one of his old Marine buddies. "Carter, you made the news," the voice said with a chuckle. "That little operation in Willow Creek? It's blowing up. The feds are calling it a major win in the fight against illegal arms trafficking." Ryan turned on the TV, where a reporter was standing outside the FBI field office in Billings. This small town in Montana became the unlikely epicenter of a major criminal investigation, the reporter said. "Thanks to the bravery and determination of its residents, authorities have uncovered a vast network of illegal arms dealing stretching across multiple states. Federal agents say this investigation could lead to even more arrests in the coming weeks." Ryan turned off the TV, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they had won a decisive victory. As the days turned into weeks, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal. The scars of the battle faded, but the lessons remained. The town had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, unity and determination could triumph. For Ryan, the experience brought a renewed sense of purpose. He decided to stay in Willow Creek, at least for a while, helping his mother and the town rebuild. "I think this is where I'm meant to be," he told Helen one evening as they sat on the porch. Helen smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I couldn't agree more."